DreAllDay.com.
You're now tuned in to the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there, even when the success you've expected to achieve is yet to occur. And on top of all this, you get a huge dose of personal initiative. That is the go-getter energy that moves all of us, including yourself, to go and make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. And then what I'm going to do here for you is we're going to put all of these elements together into a series of frameworks, approaches, insights, strategies, techniques, all under the umbrella of one unifying philosophy that is known from here on out, in case you didn't know, as work on your game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day, and welcome to the show. I will be your host every single day. And today's topic is I'm going to tell you why the age group, as of today's recording, I'm recording this in late 2021. If you're within the ages of 30 to 50, you are part of the best age group that is alive right now. Now, that doesn't mean the rest of you are terrible, but this group is just better. I'm going to explain that. I'm going to explain why that is here today. Now, before I go further into this, introducing the topic, let me tell everybody that I do have a daily motivation text that I want to send to your phone every single day. All you have to do to get it is text me right now at my number, which is 305-384-6894. Once we confirm you, you'll be getting that daily motivation every single morning straight to your phone, and a whole bunch of other things happen in those texts. So, and you can engage with me too. You can ask me questions, reply to things, all of that. And yes, that will be me texting. So that number is also down below in the show notes, 305-384-6894. So this age group that I'm referring to here, those between the ages of 30 and 50 right now, as of this recording, I'm 39 years of age, so I'm right smack in the middle of this. These are people who are born between the ages of, at least as of today's recording, let's just say around 1970 through 1990. You're around that age group. If you're not in this group, I'm sorry that you might have been born a little bit too late or a little bit too early. Now, you can catch up to this group. You can catch up to our group with the right efforts. And I'm going to tell you what those right efforts are here on this show. Actually, I do it every single day on this show. I've been doing it for 2,000 plus days in a row. But the generation I'm pointing out today has these things that they won't have to work on catching up to them, or maybe they might need to. Some of you who are born 1970, 1990, you might need to reorient yourself with some of these elements that you did naturally have. You might have weeded them out of you for some reason, but I'm going to help you out with that. Again, that's why we do the show every single day, because if I let up, then people start going all different kinds of directions, the law of entropy. But those of you who are born before 1970 or after 1990, you can catch up and join this group. There's just some, you might have to work a little bit harder. All right, you might have to just put in a little bit more effort to get there, but it's not impossible. Again, you are listening to a show that's called Work on Your Game after all, so it's definitely not impossible for you to catch up. But I'm going to explain all of that, some of it here today and the rest of it in every other episode of this show. And I will refer you to whatever episodes you will need that are necessary for you. So you outsiders, you can have these traits. Again, you just might have to put in a little bit extra effort. And this is, just to be clear, this is kind of tongue-in-cheek, what I'm saying here today, and why I'm saying this is the best age group, but is also at the same time is not. So you figure that out. Let's get into our points. Number one, the topic, once again, is why the 30 to 50 age group, at least as of this recording, because this group will shift, is the best group that is alive. Number one reason is that our age group, you were born between 1970 and 1990, you had no choice but to develop in-person social skills. You had to develop in-person social skills. You were born in this age group because you came of age at a time in which there was no other way to talk to other human beings. I mean, we have phones. We did have phones in this time. You're born in this era, though. You had to go outside. You literally had to go outside if you wanted to meet people, make friends, have conversations, and build relationships. That was the only way to do it. There was no alternative. There was no other way to do things. Now, yes, we had telephones. We had telephones, not cell phones. And we did eventually. We got cell phones pretty soon. If you were born in 1990, you pretty much grew up with cell phones. But we had telephones, which is you just pick up the phone, you dial a number, and you speak by voice to another person. There was no way to see them. There was no texting. You could just talk to a person by voice. But usually you talk to a person by voice so that you could figure out when's the next time you're going to see this person actually in person in the flesh. And if you were talking to someone by voice, the only way you could even get their phone number is you probably have met them in person already, unless maybe you're using the yellow pages or the white pages. You remember the white pages back in the day? I don't know, some of you don't even know what I'm talking about, but there used to be two books. There was the yellow pages and the white pages. Now, yellow pages was like this big, there was always a paperback book, this big, thick paperback book that was like 1,000 pages. and the yellow pages would list all the businesses in town. So I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. All the businesses in the city of Philadelphia were listed in the yellow pages, and you could just look up by category. So if you wanted some pizza, you looked up pizza shops, and then it would list all the pizza shops in the city of Philadelphia, at least those that were registered as a business, and it would have their address and it would have their phone number. So you would look it up, and you had to know the neighborhood. You had to know where you were at, because you don't want to be living in North Philly and call a pizza shop in South Philly, because they probably wouldn't deliver to you, or if you were going to pick it up, it'd be too far away. So you had to know your neighborhood so that you could look at the street addresses and know, okay, that one is near me. I can go actually get pizza from there, or they're close enough to me and they can actually deliver it to me. And mind you, back in the days, the yellow pages, let's say you were ordering a pizza, the delivery drivers, there was no Google Maps. They just had the address written on the address would just be written on the receipt or the paper, and the driver just had to know where to go. So we had to be a lot smarter back in the day. Or these days, you could be dumb and just use your phone. You don't even have to know how to spell. I'm not as good at spelling right now as I was 10 years ago, simply because Google Docs corrects so much of my spelling, and I got so much autocorrect set up there that I can misspell words on purpose, and it doesn't even matter because it automatically fixes it and I don't even notice it. So in the yellow pages, it would have listed all the businesses in town, and then the white pages was the other book. The white pages would have listed every person. So whoever at every house, for example, the house that I grew up in, my dad's name was listed in the white pages for our house. My mom's name wasn't in it, my dad's name was in it. So I guess whoever's name the phone bill was in, their name would be on there, and it would have your phone number, like the actual phone number to your house. So if you were looking somebody up, as long as their name was listed as the person at that house, or at least the person whose name was on the phone bill, whatever the company was, and there wasn't too many companies back in the day, you could actually find them and dial their house. Every phone number in the city was listed there. And one thing that we did as kids a time or two is that we would play around on the phone. We would just dial random numbers and crank call people. I don't know if people even do that anymore. I doubt that's even a thing anymore, because nowadays, if you don't want somebody calling your phone on a smartphone, you could just block the number and they can't call you, and it's pretty much over. But anyway, the yellow pages and the white pages, again, those of you who are born after 1990, ask your parents or your grandparents, and they'll tell you about it, or you can Google it. But anyway, you had to actually talk to people in person. This is the point that I'm still on point number one here. We had to have these face-to-face conversations and engagements as a normal part of our lives. And through these engagements, we learned people skills, we learned conflict resolution, conflict escalation, and we learned how to conduct ourselves a certain way, because everything that we said and every engagement that we had, it was either happening in person or it was happening with a person who we knew we would see them in person eventually. It wasn't like nowadays where you could just say something to someone through a smartphone device and you may never run into that person. You may never see that person in person ever. And even if you did, they might not even know who you are, or you might not know who they are. A lot of things are more anonymized. I don't even know if that's a word, but I just made it up. Things are much more anonymous nowadays, whereas back then, you had a pretty good idea of who you were talking to, and they had a pretty good idea of who you were, and you conducted yourself a certain way, because energy is different when you know you're going to deal with someone in person, or when you're dealing with someone in person, as opposed to what you say to them through the internet or through a phone. So these in-person skills is something that we absolutely, if you were born in this era, this group that I'm talking about, between 1970 and 1990, you absolutely had to have these abilities. Now, some of you might be listening to this and saying, well, Dre, I was born outside of that window. I had those abilities, so what do you mean? Well, I'm not finished. Let me move on to point number 2. Today's topic, once again, is why this age group of age 30 to 50 today, let's say 1970 to 1990 group, is the best group of humans alive right now. Number 2, because of the internet/intangible interactions. Now, this is the stuff that we do now. A lot of the interactions that happen now, many of you may never meet me in person. Even if you did, I might not know who you are. You might know who I am. I've had many times people will send me a message on the internet and say, I saw you at this place and that place, but they didn't say anything to me in person, but they knew who I was when they saw me there, but I didn't know who they were. So this era that we're living in right now, all of us are developing, at least those of us who are privy, we're getting into the internet/intangible interactions. Some of us have become masters of it because we're using it every day, all day. If you were born in this era that I'm talking about, the 1970 and 1990 era, you also, in addition to your interpersonal in-person skills, you also got onto the internet and you got involved with social media, where most interaction takes place nowadays, right? A lot of our interactions, the majority of my interactions with human beings are happening through the internet simply because of the sheer volume of it. I know a whole lot of people in person. I talk to people in person, shake hands, look people in their eyes on a daily basis. But at the same time, the number of people that I can engage with through the internet is just a bigger number of people. So no matter how many hands I shake in person, I can still just reach more people. Like there are more people listening to this episode right now than I will meet over the course of a whole day. Even if I go to a conference and I speak and a bunch of people line up to take pictures with me and shake my hand when I get off the stage, I will not meet as many people at that event as I could possibly engage with on the internet at one time, simply because I could talk to 100 people through my phone without getting up from this chair. But in person, I would have to actually talk to 100 people. It just takes a lot more time. So the internet just allowed us to multiply these engagements, but at the same time, it's not the same type of engagement because, as I just explained, it's not in person. So if you're in this era, you can connect with people virtually or digitally, and through the internet, you connect with more people in less time, as I just said, but it's still a different style of interaction because it requires a different set of skills. I know people who are really good at dealing with people in person. Like you get them face to face with another person or on the phone or on even, you could even say something like Zoom and having a direct conversation with that individual, they're a master. But if they had to have that conversation, let's say through text messaging or through a direct message or back and forth in the comment section, it's just not their thing. They're not as good. They're not as smooth in that setting as they are if you got them in person. And there are other people who are vice versa. They're really good at talking to people through the DMs and through comments and things like that. But at the same time, you get them in person talking to someone, and all that charisma and all that confidence, that energy is just not there. It's just they just don't have the same spark when they had to do it in person. So there are many people who have one skill but they don't have the other. But what my argument is here today is that those of us in this age group, 1970, 1990 born year, is that we have both. That we had to develop the in-person skill because there was no alternative. And when the internet came around, we all jumped on that. So we developed the virtual, the cyber skill, let's say. Remember we used to call everything cyber something? We don't even use that phrase anymore. But then we developed the cyber skill. I'm bringing it back right now through the internet and when social media came around, which required a completely different set of skills. So when I see some people who were born, let's say prior to 1970, let's say people like my parents or any of you who have no parents or any of you who's older, if you were born before 1970, for example, and I see them using the internet and using social media, they're a little bit clumsier with it, I think is the best way to put it. I'm not saying everybody, I'm saying as a whole. If we would just say on average, those of you who were born before 1970, the internet's not quite your thing simply because you're a little bit older by the time it came around and maybe you didn't look at it as something you really needed to adapt to. Whereas somebody like me, I was still in my, when the internet became the internet, let's say around 2010, I was around the age of late 20s, early 30s. So I jumped on it because I was still open to, let's just say, newer things. I wasn't close enough to the age where a lot of people start to get set in their ways, even though some people get set in their ways when they're 21, 19. And I jumped on the internet anyway, is the point that I'm making. And some people who were born, as I said, before that 1970 era, they may get on the internet and be a little bit clumsy with it, not as smooth with it, or they may just not use it at all because it's just not their thing. It doesn't really fit their taste. I remember I was talking to my grandmother, for example. That would be a good example. This is someone born before, I don't know when my grandmother was born, maybe 1940s-ish, something around then. And she was telling me, this was a few years ago, we were having this conversation. But she was telling me how, because I was asking her, does she speak to any of my cousins who are also her grandchildren? Because I was talking to her by the phone. She was like, well, I hear from them on Facebook. And I kind of chuckled when she said that because I could tell by the way she said it and the fact that I was on the phone with her, we were having this conversation, that she doesn't really count that as talking to someone. And neither do I. I don't personally count it as, like, if you know me in person or you know me personally, we have some type of personal relationship, I'm talking to you right now, and you are messaging me in Instagram or Facebook, I don't count that as us having a conversation. A conversation to me is on the phone or in person, or we could also include Zoom because we can look at each other. But that's a conversation to me. I don't count a DM as a conversation if we know each other on a personal level. Now, if that's the closest you could get to me as a DM, then go ahead, let's DM or text or something like that. But sometimes I would have some people that I know, people who I know, who are in this great age group that I'm mentioning, people who are peers of mine, sending me DMs, and I will tell them, I will DM them back and say, why the hell are you sending me a DM when you have my number? Why are you sending me a message on Facebook when you have my phone number? Why don't you text me or call me? Why are you talking to me in a DM? DM is for people who don't have my phone number and don't have a way to get in touch with me. This is the closest they can get is a DM. They should be DMing me, but you should not be sending me a direct message. So sometimes, and this is something that I touched on a little bit earlier, sometimes people who are even from this era where we know how to get in touch directly, we default to going to these virtual platforms, let's say, for our communications. Just like my grandmother was lamenting that the grandkids will reach out to her through Facebook, and the grandkids look at that as, oh, I'm interacting with my grandmother, when she doesn't see it that way. And I understood that, and the reason I understand it is because I'm from this great era born between 1970 and 1990, where we have both the interpersonal skills, in-person skills, and we have the virtual abilities, but also at the same time the sensibility to understand who are you talking to. Are you talking to someone who's from before that era who wants more direct of an interaction, or are you talking to someone from this era who wants they don't mind the virtual interaction, or to them that's just a normal interaction? So through the internet, yes, you can connect with more people in less time, and it's easier to do. That's the whole, social media and a lot of the platforms that we use, that we sign up for and get access to, quote unquote, for free. They're not actually free. I explained that in episode 1690, why they are absolutely not free. But through these platforms, their whole purpose is to make it really easy for you, make everything very easy, very intuitive, to where you don't need to read an instruction manual to start using them. How many of you needed to read an instruction manual to start using Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or YouTube? Or TikTok? You didn't. You saw it. You immediately inherently understood how it worked. Even if you didn't quite understand it, you didn't go read a manual on it or a web post on it. Someone explained it to you, someone showed you, and you just start messing around with it, and eventually you got it. Within a week, you were pretty smooth at doing it. These platforms are designed to do that, make everything really easy. The thing is, not everybody speaks that language of using these platforms. So any of you, and I actually did an episode on this, if you have people in your life who are from the prior era, like the first era that I talked about, where everything was in person and you had to actually meet people in real life to have direct engagement with them, make sure you are engaging with them on the level in which they wish to be engaged, not the level that you want to be engaged, especially if you want to have some level of influence, or you want to persuade those people. So I see some people, again, born prior to this era, they're not really privy to using the internet in that way, or they won't use it at all. So you got to make sure you're communicating with them in the right way, based on your needs and based on your desired outcomes. Moving on to point number 3. Today's topic, once again, is why the era of people born between 1970 and 1990 is the best era of human beings alive right now. Number 3, the reason why it's the best is because we learned both the go outside, quote unquote, in-person skills, and we have the internet / social / virtual era skills. We have a combination of both, and we have them both naturally. They're both inherent. We didn't have to really think about them. Nobody had to tell us to do them. We naturally picked up on both because we have lived in both eras at the exact same time. We have one foot in each era, maybe both feet in each era at the exact same time. We are the only era, 1970, 1990 born, that has lived through both in periods of time in which we are open to whatever is going on. We were young enough to take on the internet as it came along, but at the same time old enough that we remember when there was no internet and we had to actually do everything in person. That's what this era is. The generation older was a little bit older when the internet hit, and they may not have picked up on it as much because they were a little bit more set in their ways. Not to say there are not exceptions, of course. And the younger generation, they didn't have to live through the era where you had to actually talk to people in person to make connections. They could do everything through the internet. They never had to go outside to connect with people. Again, not to say there are not exceptions and that some of you didn't go outside and connect with people, even though you had access to social medias and all of that and Facebooks to make your connections 100% if you wanted to. There are exceptions to everything. Our generation, we had to go outside, and we were young enough and open enough to adapt to the internet at the exact same time. So our generation, this 1970, 1990 generation, we can operate naturally in both worlds. Whereas those of you who are younger or older, you might have to think about it a little bit more. You might have to make a conscious choice to learn how to operate in other worlds. We could do it without having to think about it at all. Now, again, everything I said here is kind of tongue-in-cheek, but it's also kind of not. So you can figure that out. All that said, let's recap today's classes. Why the 30 to 50 age group as of today, so let's say the group born between 1970 and 1990 is the best age group alive. If you are not in this group, I apologize if you were born too early or too late, but you can catch up with the right efforts. I explain those efforts right here on this show every single day. Point number one, we had the in-person skills. If you were born in this era, you remember you had to go outside, literally, to meet people, make friends, have conversations, and build relationships, whereas people in this era may not necessarily have to do that. You knew every person you talked to, even on the phone, you're eventually going to see them in person. And there's a certain level of skill you need to talk to someone in person that is not the same as talking to someone in a direct message or a text message. Number two, the internet/intangible interaction. If you're born in this era, you also got onto the internet and social media where a lot of interaction takes place every day nowadays. And through the internet, of course, you can connect with more people in less time, but it requires a different set of skills. There are people who are great at talking to people in person, not so great at talking to people on the internet, and vice versa. People who can talk to someone on the internet, but you get them in person and the energy is completely different. And you're like, what happened to all that personality? Number three, why this era is the best is that we learned both the go outside/in-person skills and the social media/virtual era skills. So we're the only era that lived through both. Older generation was a little bit older, the younger generation was a little bit too young to do in person, old generation a little bit old to jump on the internet. Again, not to say there are not exceptions on both sides, but our generation had both and thrived in both, and that's why we are the best. That, there is no exception. So all that said, you want to receive my daily motivation text. I send it out every day to everyone who is in my texting community. That message is guaranteed to keep you sharp, focused, and on point every single day. Guaranteed, or your money back. You want to get that text, send me a text right now at 305-384-6894 and Work on Your Game University, my group coaching program, one-on-one coaching program, and self-directed learning. All open right now. All you got to do is go to workonyourgameuniversity.com, choose your mission, let's get to it. Work on your game. Dre, all